Hey guys, Sam's disembodied right hand here. I've contracted a new illness recently that exclusively requires me to play video games where you can mess with the main character's head. Playing any other game will kill me instantly though, so I've been really struggling to find a game where I can mess with some heads.
Hello!
Oh fuck yeah! Super Mario 64, also known as not the 64th Mario game, was the first 3D game in the series and was a major revolution in third-dimensional gaming as a whole. Honestly, what can I say about this game that has been said 1,000 times before? Super Mario 64's innovation to the 3D platformer is to Super Mario Bros.' innovation for the 2D platformer. But in a time where games from this generation are slowly decaying in structure and replayability, can Super Mario 64 still be as spectacular as it was back in the day? Well, I guess the only way to know is to play it ourselves, but first some history. I don't have the same emotional connection to this game as I do with Super Mario World, but 64 was still a game that I was actively aware of as a child. It was a game that I knew existed for the longest time and was one that I desperately wanted to try out. There was one particular version of Mario 64 that I played as a kid that we may or may not talk about later, but overall it would be a very long time before I'd actually play it in its original form. However, a couple years ago I picked up the game on a whim and tried it out for the first time. So are my impressions still the same as they were a couple years back? Well, there's only one way to find out. This is Super Mario 64. So after Super Mario World's release on the SNES, the mainline Mario series just sort of vanished for a while. Now that doesn't mean that there weren't any new Mario games in general. The Italian plumber would experiment with multiple different side series and spin-offs throughout the console's lifespan, and a remastered collection of the NES Mario games was even released under Super Mario All-Stars. But behind the scenes, series creator Shigeru Miyamoto was envisioning a new Mario game for the main series that would be entirely in 3D, based on his work on Star Fox at the time. Originally, the game was considered being created exclusively with the SNES's FX chip, under the title Super Mario FX. But development was later pushed back to the Nintendo 64, not due to hardware limitations, but simply because the N64 controller had more buttons, a testament that I'm sure F-Zero fans understand right about now. A fully 3D Mario game on the SNES would have definitely been promising, but have you seen 3D games on the SNES? They haven't aged all too well, and overall I'm pretty glad this didn't happen. But anyway, Miyamoto's vision would go into a 3-year-long development cycle, with the dev team being much larger than the teams that worked on the previous Mario games, and they certainly had a lot of important decisions to make. Would the game use tank controls for movement? Would it use a fixed camera or free cam? What would the game even look like? And much more were heavily considered questions by the guys over at Nintendo, but eventually they figured out their vision on what they wanted the final product to be. Instead of following the example of the previous Mario games with multiple short burst platforming levels, 64 would have an overall smaller amount of levels, but with multiple objectives to complete in much larger and open-ended worlds. Because of the bigger level sizes, exploration became a major component in the game, while also making sure players were still having fun playing it. The idea to ditch tank controls in favor of full 360-degree movement came about, as well as a freely controllable camera to look around the world. There were a ton of other things that came about from the development of Super Mario 64 that I'm definitely glossing over here, but to summarize, a lot of the ideas that the devs had at the time were pretty unique and would majorly help to innovate the entire industry and create a new standard for the future of video games as a whole. One interesting thing from the development though was a planned split-screen co-op mode where the second player would control Luigi, but it was eventually scrapped and Luigi was completely removed from the game despite countless internet rumors telling you otherwise. Well anyway, after a somewhat long development cycle, Super Mario 64 was released as a launch title for the Nintendo 64 in all regions. Aw man, I'm getting really excited to play this again, time to put this bad boy into the N64. Well, I would if I actually owned one. Yeah, I kinda forgot to mention earlier that I had to borrow my friend's N64 to actually play the game, and due to current real-world circumstances, I can't really borrow it again. So I guess we're just gonna have to commit a cardinal sin and play it through the Wii U's Virtual Console. On the plus side, we won't have to play the game with the N64's funky-looking controller, but conversely, the VC release greatly neuters the game's vivid colors alongside the added dread of actually having to turn on the Wii U. I'll just say this now, if you want to play Super Mario 64, I'd highly recommend getting it on original hardware, funky looking controller and all. This is just one of those games where the experience is enhanced from playing it in its intended way. Alright, when we boot up the game we get to witness a fully 3D modeled Mario head and Italian abuse. It must have been so mind-blowing to have this be the first thing you see when you start the game. Just seeing the technical leap from 16-bit games to this is crazy, and was surely an eye-opening experience at the time. While the model of Mario's head isn't super great looking by today's standards, it's still really charming, especially with Mario's expressiveness in his face and new voice. Yeah, that's right, this was the first game where Charles Martinet voiced Mario, disregarding a PC minigame collection and a typing game. Martinet just nails Mario, and I think some of his voice lines here are some of the best and most recognizable lines he's ever delivered. Not to discredit his work in future games, of course. Well, after messing with Mario's face, we officially start the game and get introduced to its story, and oh, we've been invited to the castle for some cake. That's nice. Surely this couldn't go horribly wrong. Oh. Man, who would have thought that Nintendo would reuse the same plot for the 5th game in a row? Well, it is the first game in 3D after all, so I guess I'll give it a pass this time for trying to keep things familiar to longtime fans. Anyway, after the intro cutscene plays, we're freely able to move around the outside of Peach's castle, which is a nice open area that serves as a great place to learn a lot of Mario's new moves, and man, there's a ton of them. Jumping to better hardware has provided Mario with a plethora of new techniques to use, and they're all pretty great. Mario can now dive, long jump, do a 3-hit combo, triple jump, side jump, ground pound, wall kick, somersault, crawl. Hot damn, these movement options here are incredible. This is easily the most mobile Mario has been up until now, and I only just scratched the surface of the things he can do here. The dive and the long jump are awesome to use and are easily the fastest way to move around in this game. The triple jump isn't that bad either, and it'll help you reach new heights so long as you don't bonk on a wall first. A lot of Mario's new moves here can be hard to digest for first-time players, but thankfully there are plenty of signs around the castle or in levels that can teach them to you if you want to know how to perform them. As for Mario's actual control, he handles pretty well. You can walk or run depending on how hard you push the control stick in one direction, which is a nice addition compared to using a run button. Overall, his control isn't perfect. Mario's position can be a little hard to adjust on super small platforms, especially if you're trying to do a 180-degree turn, and some of the inputs for his new moves are incredibly similar to other ones, so you'll often just perform a move you don't want to use. But for Nintendo's first attempt at fully 3D movement, they did phenomenally well. Now, one thing I won't praise about Mario's control or Mario himself is that he now takes fall damage in this game and has a health meter. I can live with the health meter, but I'm really not a fan of the fall damage. I don't really like fall damage in platformers anyway, and in this game, it just feels like fall damage is the primary way Mario gets hurt outside of slowly drowning underwater. Thankfully, you can bypass the falling damage if you perform a ground pound or dive right before landing, so it's not all bad. Anyway, as we enter Peach's castle, we get to see how the game is structured as well as the rest of the hub world as a whole. Inside the castle are several doors leading to this game's levels in the form of paintings. Jumping into a painting will transport you to a new level, where your objective is to complete tasks with your reward being a power star. In Mario 64, there are a total of 15 levels with 7 stars in each, alongside a hidden 15 secret stars throughout the castle itself. That makes the total amount of stars into 120, but you only need 70 to actually beat the game. Level objectives can range from taking out a boss, finding the level's 8 red coins, or even reuniting a mother penguin with her child, only to filicide that child 5 seconds later. Yeah, if you thought Mario wasn't going to abuse animals anymore after Super Mario World. Anyway, the best part of Super Mario 64's levels is that for the most part, you're completely free to play whatever level and whatever objective you want. Yeah, some levels are locked behind star requirements, and some missions can only be completed by actually selecting that mission before jumping into the world, but besides those exceptions, you can basically play any level in any order. The levels themselves are very open-ended, and allow for lots of exploration and freedom in tackling level objectives, and just overall, these levels are amazing. Some of my favorites include Bob-Omb Battlefield and Womp's Fortress for being great starter levels, the Secret Slide for its music alone, Cool Mountain for being an excellent snow level with some really unique level objectives, and Lethal Lava Lane for just being fun to go through. Not every level is a winner though. Later levels like Rainbow Cruise and Hazy Maze Cave can be really obnoxious. Tick-Tock Clock is a fun concept, but not one that's fun to play in my opinion. Big Boo's Haunt because fuck! And some of the secret stars in the castle aren't that great. But the best part about Mario 64 is that if you don't want to play a specific level, you don't have to. So long as you end the game with 70 stars, you can skip over playing some levels, and this design choice just helps to give Mario 64 the most replayability in any Mario game so far. I love just being able to breeze through the levels I like and only dealing with some of the more obnoxious ones, and some major reasons why I want to replay this game so often. Visually, the levels in game as a whole look really good, if not a little dated graphically. Of course, these 1996 visuals aren't great by today's standards, but I still personally find a lot of charm in how this game looks. It's still bright and colorful, and Mario's model is kind of iconic in my opinion, so much so that it became an unlockable costume in Super Mario Odyssey. Models for enemies don't look all that great though, especially Bowser. God, Bowser is just really ugly in this game, and he looks like he's suffering from an allergic reaction to something. While we're talking about enemies, there aren't a lot of new ones outside of Whomps and Scuttlebugs, the bastards of the Mario series. But I feel like the lack of new enemies was mostly due to wanting to translate classic enemies into 3D, so it's fine by me. The enemies look fairly accurate to how they're supposed to look, and they're easy to discern, but I was never a fan of how thwomps looked in this game, mostly because this is how they were represented through Kirby's Down B and Smash for a while. Normally, you'd have a plethora of power-ups to use to deal with enemies, but surprisingly, there aren't any traditional power-ups in this game. The star has been reworked onto your level objective, of course, but besides that, the staple mushroom and fire flower are absent. In their place are the cap power-ups that are really just meant to complete objectives instead of taking out enemies. There's the metal cap that I guess functions similarly to the invincibility star, and makes Mario metallic and much heavier, but he still takes fall damage, so this isn't really all too useful in my opinion. There's the invisibility cap that can allow Mario to phase through bars and paintings, which is barely used throughout the game. And finally the wing cap, which allows Mario to glide in the sky with some pretty poor controls. Overall, the power-ups kinda blow in this game, but while the power-ups aren't all too great, the music contrastly is exceptional. Themes like Bob-Omb Battlefield, the Slide theme, and especially Dire Dire Docks and the Credits theme are amazing sounding, and the soundtrack as a whole is really recognizable and just incredible, with only like 1 or 2 exceptions. My only major gripe with the OST is that lots of levels reuse the same themes, so I hope you like the Slide theme because the last few levels of the game reuse it frequently. From the way I've been describing it so far, Mario 64 seems to be pretty perfect, right? Well, there are plenty of nitpicks and general gripes I have with the game. Lots of people really dislike how you're booted out of the world when you die or collect a power star, but I personally don't see much of an issue with it considering the simplicity of most missions. Unless it's regarding the 100 coin stars. Earlier I mentioned how every level had 7 total stars within them. Well, the 100 coin star missions are carried over into every level, similarly to the A-Red coin missions. The task is to simply grab 100 coins within the level and nab the star, but the problem comes from those larger levels or with levels that have strict coin amounts, so you better hope you don't miss a certain coin somewhere or die, because otherwise you're gonna have to redo the entire thing all over again, and finding all the necessary coins can be incredibly tedious. Not to mention that once you grab the 100th coin, the star will immediately appear over your head, so you better hope that you didn't grab it in a perilous or difficult to reach spot. In my opinion, if you're just going for the 70 star count to beat the game, then you really shouldn't bother going with the 100 coin star unless they're in those easier levels at the start of the game. Another thing I kinda dislike is some of the collision detection in this game. You will often just bonk off walls when trying to go for a wall jump, or you'll do this weird jittering thing if you jump on the very edge of a platform. I don't really know what causes this, but I will assure you that it will happen a lot, and I always get scared of dying every time this happens. And of course, probably the worst thing associated with Mario 64 is the camera. The camera can often get stuck on several objects or just not give you enough information you need to platform accordingly due to it technically not being a full-range camera. The N64 only had 4 buttons for camera control as opposed to a second control stick, meaning getting it to show you everything you want at all times is an impossibility, and the game quickly shows you how aged it is because of it. That's another reason why I recommend playing Mario 64 on original hardware, because you truly haven't seen hell until you try to use a full 360-degree stick for 4 button inputs. It's not fun. At the end of the day, Super Mario 64, like a lot of the games released at this time, has noticeably aged, but that still doesn't hinder my enjoyment of the game as a whole. It's still an incredibly tight and fun to play platformer, and its replayability makes it something I would happily revisit again. Now if only I could take it on the go with me. Holy shit. Yes, in late 2004, Nintendo released a full-on remake of Mario 64 for the Nintendo DS. It was obviously to market the handheld as being powerful enough to play a 3D N64 game, but it's still pretty impressive how they got this game to work, and was a pretty smart move at the time. Now I personally experienced Mario 64 through the DS remake first, so I'm feeling pretty nostalgic right about now. Time to pop this bad boy into my DS. This day just gets more and more disappointing. Alright, I guess we're gonna have to send twice today. Booting up the game, we're once again greeted to a 3D modeled head of Mario and also Yoshi this time. You can't abuse them like you could in the original game. Instead, you can only mess with drawings of the characters as well as draw things on your own. I think I'll start using this feature for my future to-do list from now on. The story is the same as the original, however Luigi and Wario, for some reason, have been invited to the castle alongside Mario this time, but they shortly go missing and it's up to Yoshi to find out where they went. Yoshi was present in the original Mario 64, but he could only be seen as a reward for getting all of the stars in the game and by going to the top of the castle. Structurally, 64DS is the same as the original Mario 64, but with the addition of 30 more stars and 3 new playable characters. To boost the star count, some new level objectives have been added, as well as some new secret stars to the castle. The new objectives and secret stars are fairly memorable, but they don't really compare to the original game's levels in my opinion. But that didn't stop my muscle memory from trying to do stars that were only in the DS game when playing the original. However, when most people think of 64DS, they obviously think of the new characters, Yoshi, Luigi, and Wario. Yoshi is pretty similar to Mario, except he can use his flutter jump and 4 enemies to make egg projectiles that have incredible homing capabilities. Mario is pretty much the same as he was in the original game, but he is the only character that can battle against Bowser for some odd reason. He's also the only character that can wall jump, which makes even less sense to me. Well, at least Luigi is pretty good to use. He has his traditional slipperiness and can do the spinning backflip, which is really good to use if you want to skip sections of levels. He can also shortly hover after jumping, which is basically just Yoshi's flutter but not as good. Wario is easily the worst character in the game. Due to his weight, he's much slower than the others and he can't jump as high because of it. He also has the useless ability of added strength, which means nothing considering most enemies go down in one hit anyway. Well, I guess he can break these black blocks, but overall Wario just got the short end of the stick in this game. The cat power-ups in the original game have now been replaced by the Universal Power Flower, which now gives characters abilities specific to them. Luigi and Wario have been given the abilities of the invisibility and metal caps respectively. Mario still has the wing cap alongside the added power balloon from Super Mario World, which is alright but isn't really used all too much. And Yoshi has the ability to shoot fire out of his mouth to commit arson and melt ice cubes. You can also find a power mushroom in some levels, allowing you to grow to a much larger size for a short moment. The graphics for this game are much improved from the original, though I do think some of the charm from the original game was lost in translation. Sure, all the models look much cleaner, but since the DS obviously can't fully replicate 3D games, the presentation took a hit with more jaggedy visuals and big crush sound clips. And while we're on the topic of the DS not replicating 3D games fully, let's talk about the controls. Obviously the DS doesn't have a regular control stick, so instead you control the game using only the 8 directions on the D-pad. Converting the game that was responsible for the popularization of full 360-degree movement into a version that only has 8 directions is pretty baffling, and at some points the game won't control well because of it. It's not horrendous, but it'll definitely take some time to get used to, and using the D-pad also made my thumbs hurt quite a bit. Now playing this on a 3DS or Wii U does make the control feel better, but that doesn't magically fix the problem. The game was only designed with 8 directions in mind, so playing this on newer hardware doesn't just magically reprogram the entire game to have full 360-degree movement. You can control the game with a stylus if you want, but would you honestly trust anyone who prefers to control this game this way? If you play Mario 64 DS with the stylus, I'm pretty sure you're on an FBI watch list somewhere. Overall, the control is fine, but it's far from feeling as good as it did in the original version, especially with the addition of a run button making the control scheme slightly more complicated. At least the camera is a little bit better than the original, but it's still not all that great. Instead of 4 button inputs for camera control, you only use the L button and move it into which direction you want to look at. The camera does seem to be more adjustable than it was previously, though I would say that this is far from preferred. On the touchscreen is a little mini-map of the level you're in, and it can help you to show where a star or red coins are located, and it's kind of lame in my opinion. Having a map pretty much completely destroys the need to explore these worlds for level objectives, and it just oversimplifies the game as a whole. The map will also show you the location of these little Mario, Luigi, and Wario caps that can morph you into that respective character, completely negating the need to frequently switch characters to complete a level requirement. There's a new multiplayer mode where you and your friend control Yoshis as you battle for stars and coins. I obviously can't play it because I'm on the Wii U and because of real world circumstances, but even as a kid I preferred playing Mario Kart over this. Well, at least there's a wide variety of minigames that can be played. You can unlock these games by finding rabbits around the castle that will give you keys to unlock new ones. Most of these returned in another DS game, New Super Mario Bros., which is how I played them for the first time, and some of these are really fun to waste time with. Who would have thought that Luigi would be the root cause of my gambling addiction? In conclusion, Super Mario 64 DS is far from the definitive way to play Mario 64. If Nintendo had just waited until the 3DS to remake this game alongside other Nintendo 64 classics, then this game would probably be even better than the original. But the limited control and ho-hum presentation really limits this game in a lot of ways. Despite the childhood memories I have with 64 DS, I can see that it could have been way better, and in my opinion, you should just stick with the N64 original. It's aged, but its replayability and overall fun factor still makes Super Mario 64 great even after all this time. It's by no means the greatest Mario game ever, but it's still pretty high up there, and I'd still recommend you give it a try yourself. Mario 64 still holds up pretty well, and I still enjoy both versions, but if you excuse me, I need to attend a eulogy for the baby penguin Mario mercilessly killed. He can't keep getting away with this.